Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to the Asia InsurTech podcast. We are joined today by Simone Dossetor, the CEO of InsurTech Australia. Thank you so much for coming to the show. Before we get into kind of the main part of this conversation, let's give our listeners and viewers a little bit of your background for some context.
Thank you. And delighted to be on here. You've had a lot of our members on the show. I've been looking through the back catalogue, so that's fantastic. So I finally made it on. My background, I've been in the insurance industry forever. I think more than 20 years, so I don't kind of say exactly how longer anymore. Corporate side, I was with Munich Re, their Chief Operating Officer, with an Australian insurance company, worked in London with Deloitte in their consulting business for a while. And I've been in this InsurTech Australia CEO role for the last 3 years, and it's a lot of fun.
It sure is. Let's talk about this. Why is Australia an ideal place, if not the ideal place, to build an InsurTech startup?
Yeah, well, we think that it's a great kind of combination of those two things, the insurance and the tech. So it's a great insurance market, it's pretty mature, it's highly regulated, we have lots of catastrophes, so we have all the risk there, we have bushfires and floods and all those sorts of great things. So we have an established, really mature industry with lots of expertise and lots of, passion for insurance, and a pretty sophisticated consumer in terms of what they're getting. Lots of people buy lots of different types of insurance products. And then from a technology perspective, you have all these great tech businesses, supported by government and programs. We're pretty far in advance in adoption of technology as a kind of consumers. And then I think the other thing is we're kind of a little way from everywhere else in terms of time zone and distance. So we're quite collaborative. And I think that's one of the things about our ecosystem is we just have to kind of work together. And insurance, you see that. And then, the InsurTech community is very much that way.
If I look at the US market, just to make a comparison, right, it looks like one big continuous market, but there are 50 different states and all of those states are regulated in a different way. Are there kind of unique aspects of the Australian market as well that we should know about so we can get a better understanding of how that works, like how the brokers work together, how many brokers there are, the licenses and stuff like that, so we can get a better sense of what the market microstructure looks like?
Yeah, so we have states, but the states don't really impact the insurance regulation like they do in the US. So the state kind of only comes into really play with a few sort of duties and things, but for most of the businesses they can operate pretty much nationally wherever they're kind of located. So that makes it somewhat simpler. I think the other thing is really around, it has kind of come from this background. There were these motor clubs, so it had come from this, it's a big motor insurance market, a little like the US. And so you have some quite big players. And so globally, some of our large insurers, the QBEs, Insurance Australia Group, Suncorp, which don't have a global presence, but are, in the top 20 global businesses. And it makes it kind of interesting for the reinsurance markets in particular.
So you mentioned some really interesting companies. And I don't want to talk about any of them in particular, but I have spoken to a few of them, as you know. Some of them also, and this just popped into my head, but some of them also run investment businesses as well. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how that collaboration works in a little bit more detail between the incumbents and the sort of rising InsurTechs, and how those investments kind of play into that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it is very much a collaboration, and they've all got, a slightly different strategy and have had different takes over the years of what they've done with their investment strategy. But I think mostly they're very much looking to support those InsurTechs as a strategic investor, and they're looking for the right businesses, whether they're located in Australia or globally, and they're looking for businesses that are going to help the overall strategy of their business. So businesses that they can get in kind of early and help mentor and develop, that are going to have an outcome. And I think they also recognise that they're not necessarily the best innovator themselves. And so it's a way for them also to sort of not outsource that ideas, but collaborate.
I got it. How can I say this the right way? The Australian market has 26.6 million people. Let's call it 30 million people population size, right? And one of the things that a lot of my guests from Australia have said to me is that it's a great test market where they can test a whole bunch of ideas, whether it's collaborating with incumbents, getting investment, or building sort of interesting, new, and innovative products, but then kind of blowing them out to the rest of the world. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of it, not just as a vibrant and dynamic place where tech gets developed, but where these tests take place that then can get internationalized and globalized?
Yeah, I mean, we hear that as well, and I think there's some great examples because I think it can be more manageable in that it is just one regulatory system. You can test it in particular geographies that that is sort of managed and worked at. And so then, if it does go wrong, and, some of these things will go wrong, it's not as big of a balance sheet hit. So that's very much kind of seen. And the fact that, it's English speaking, rule of law, all those kind of activities, we do see those examples. And then I think where they can then use that as a case study for some of those international kind of expansion. And we do very much quite early, our InsurTech members will be looking kind of at global expansion when they're not even fully up and going in the local market.
Do you see a relationship, because it's just so close, right? I mean, I don't think people understand just how close I want to get this right, the northwest of Australia or the western side of Australia is to Indonesia, which is one of the largest countries in Southeast Asia, right? It's just so close, which then is a gateway into the rest of the Southeast Asia, and then frankly, Singapore as well.
Yeah.
Do you see that relationship as strong and strengthening as well because of the things you just mentioned, this quick ability to internationalize and go global?
So we see that as a potential, but it's still kind of evolving. And, we've been up to Singapore for the conferences a few times, and we've brought a number of our members there. And particularly for the West Coast, they're on the same time zone. It makes kind of a lot of sense, but it is quite Asia's not one market, it's multiple markets.
Yeah.
So there is still a bit of a challenge of businesses translating from that very regulated, quite expensive, developed insurances in Australia to finding the right market fit. And some of them have found the market's just not ready for, their products, not too sophisticated, but just doesn't really have the audience yet. But we do, I think it's just a matter of time. So we do think that is got more and more potential, but it's just finding the right. And, there's a few that have done really well, like some of the motor businesses and some of the parametrics and those sort of things. But, and I think probably the other thing is Asia's much more life insurance, isn't it? Where that's sort of a more of a challenge market within Australia.
And also the penetration in Southeast Asia in particular, but in Asia in general, is not nearly as high as it is in Australia, right? Where, like you said, it's longstanding, very well accepted and very well developed insurance market. It just seems to me like it should be a bigger opportunity. It also seems to me, again, that the population in Australia is quite diverse too, so you can get diverse responses to products, which then again can help it go outside. But almost more interestingly to me, I was talking to the head of Start Me Up Hong Kong a couple of weeks ago on another one of my shows, and she was mentioning to me, Jane Chan, she was mentioning to me that a lot of the entrepreneurs that come to Hong Kong or that in Hong Kong aren't from Hong Kong.
Okay.
And I've noticed this kind of combination in Australia as well. A lot of great Australian entrepreneurs. But because, and again, tell me where I'm wrong here, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but because so many of the educated kids from Southeast Asia want to come to the universities in Australia, which are so good, that they sometimes end up staying there and saying, this is a great market. The people here are really great. It's a great place to live.
Yeah.
Let's develop here, but let's develop in partnership. Do you see that happening as well?
Yeah, we do. And we do see, particularly entrepreneurs that have been in other markets and come back. It's often that lifestyle, is a key factor in that. They're married to an Australian, or they're, some reason that brings them here, because if you've come from, you want, I guess, it is a long way from other family and friends. And it is it's still a small market. It's not the size of, the US or Europe, so.
Yeah, but I see a lot of kids going there to get educated. And then when I talk to the founders, I'm like, where are you from? And they're like, I'm from India, I'm from Indonesia, I'm from Singapore, I'm from Thailand. And I'm like, cool. And again, I think that makes it then easier to bring stuff back, if that makes sense. Not that that's the only point to develop in Australia, but I just see it because that's where a lot of those kids are from. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, hopefully will develop further. And that's, once... I would hope that happens more. People who've come from those backgrounds then can naturally take the products into those markets where language isn't so much the barrier, and they have the connections. So we see a little bit of that, but yeah, I'd like to see more. I think there's much more potential.
I would love to see more of that as well. Frankly, I'd love to see more of that in Thailand. I'd love to see a lot more foreigners come here and start developing companies. Are there, and again, this is just me thinking off the top of my head, but in places like Dubai and places like that, they have like special visas for people that want to come and work there. Do we have something like that in Australia, or is it just not even necessary because going there is just so easy anyway?
So, you do need visas, like even just to visit. So, make sure you get your visa. But there are some programs, so particularly for sort of tech talent. So there are some pathways, for fintech and insurtech and that sort of thing. So it is a bit of a long and somewhat expensive process, but it's certainly doable.
Yeah, I mean, I just know a ton of people that would want to live there. I think about it myself, but that's like a conversation for a different time. Can we talk a little bit more specifically about InsurTech Australia? Like, what role does it play? Are there accelerator programs? Are there education programs? Like, what does it do to help both the incumbents, the startups, the InsurTechs, not just develop, but work together and do those partnerships that you were talking about?
Yeah, so we see our core mission and our focus is very much around creating that ecosystem. So we're aim to be the connector and to sort of accelerate those partnerships. We do a little bit of advocacy, but that we don't see that as it's more of a secondary purpose. So we have about 100 and 110 InsurTechs members, so quite a good kind of size. Right from people with an idea. We still get kind of people very early stage, which is great. People are still starting up, ideas and businesses. Sometimes they're not from the insurance industry and they've just kind of had a bad insurance claim and developed this product through to, sort of scaling. And so we very much help them on that journey. So how do we help them make connections? How do we connect them, as they want to scale globally and take them overseas? How do we introduce them to potential customers? But we're not their business development arm. Sometimes they want us to, we can't do BD for them, but connections. And then for the partners, so we have about 50 corporate partners, so the insurers, the brokers, the adjusters, the consulting firms, everyone else in that insurance industry. It's around how do they get that external perspective. So sometimes they're quite big businesses and they've got great innovation and they're doing AI and they're doing all this stuff with some of the bigger ones, but they're very, internally focused and managing. So it's really this opportunity to bring them, well, this is what this is what's happening, this is what the startups are doing. And sometimes even connecting them across their own organisation. So the startups might be chatting with them, but it's very sort of across. And so just sort of bringing that together. And then for the smaller businesses, it's more around how do they get access to external insights. And in terms of what we do, so we do lots of events, introductions, we do member education, so how do we, and then we're very focused, so it's just InsurTech, it's not just startups. There's lots of people doing great startup stuff. There's also people doing great insurance education, but we just want to focus on very much that sort of core mission.
I see a lot of stuff coming out of the Antler people in Australia.
Yeah, they're a good program. I think they're the ones we recommend when they're doing the early stage programs. So a number of the early stage have gone through that. We haven't run our own accelerator. I think there's just not enough here to justify running a program like that in that sort of way. But we more just do individual kind of intros or connect them with someone else.
How do you all keep up to date on emerging technologies? I mean, there's so much hype around, and I don't even want to mention them necessarily, but around, this tech or that tech. And every new year, like some kind of tech comes out that you have to be involved in, but you don't really need to be. How do you keep up on, just as an industry association, with like what is actually real and what is actually hype and where like these companies should focus? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's hard. And, one of the things I struggle with is there's a lot of very high level, there's panels and there's these sort of very high level discussion. It's like, yeah, I know all that. And then it gets sort of super deep, people are doing sort of detailed programming and like, I don't need to know that. So it is very much just kind of talking to the members, when we get to, we run quite a lot of different pitch opportunities. So we always love to kind of hear what they're doing. And that's for us normally enough. We just need enough to say, this business is doing this. Like we had one of our partners today say, we're looking for someone who does PDS tech solutions, and we could say, okay, here's 3 of our members. And it's really at that level that we need to know. And then beyond that, we talk to the experts.
Do you spend a lot of time talking to individual startup founders? And I'm curious if you do, like, what do you think makes a great one? And also, it's more than just that for me, right? I've done so many recordings over the past like 6, 7 years. We talked about this offline, right? I kind of feel like I have this sense of who has the highest delta for success, if that makes sense. Do you feel the same way? You meet like hundreds and hundreds of people in the ecosystem, and you've been in the insurance business. We don't want to give the number, but for a while. So you know the business really well. And also you're meeting the founders. Do you get a sense for like what makes a great founder, what doesn't, and who can and who can't succeed, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that persistence, isn't there? They just have to be, it is hard work. Like, it's your business, you're building the tech, running the insurance, trying to get investment. So they really need to have a super high persistence level of, I guess, self-belief. And that makes them a little kind of, not odd, but yeah, a little one-tracked. So they wouldn't necessarily kind of fit in other kind of businesses. There's that. And then I think the other thing is often they've got the great idea of the product, but they haven't really thought about how are they selling it, or how are they selling it at scale, how are they scaling it. So I think it's the ones that have that commercial lens pretty early, and have, and that's why, you hear it, the investors always like, if they've done it before, then they get kind of, they want people who've done it multiple times because they can bring those two together.
For sure. Yeah, one of the startups I think about a lot, and maybe it's just because I think that they were early on the show, is Upcover. And just the reason why I think about Sky and Anish is just because they've been through so many ups and downs. I think they're a really good example of this idea of persistence, right? I don't even know, I can't even comment how their business is doing per se, but I just get the sense if they've nailed something, that founders like that have a real strong propensity to be able to succeed, because they're not willing to fail per se, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and they're not going to be sort of, if things don't quite work and they've got to pivot the business, they're willing to do that. They're sort of, they're sure of themselves enough to make those pivots. Yeah, because there's a bunch of them and you're like, oh, I thought we were this. And then the next time you talk to them, there's something else, and they kind of evolve. Whereas I think the ones that don't, it's sort of like they hit a roadblock and then it's kind of too hard and then they kind of pull up. Or it's like a nice idea, but they need their salary, or and they're the ones that just kind of fall by the wayside. Yeah.
Yeah, to be fair, Tatiana was a really great example of that, right? With Curium. I mean, they were just doing this thing, and their customers came back to them like, "That's great, but how about this?"
Yeah, and they're
Right.
really kind of getting traction in that. And I mean, I think I've heard her pitch like 10 times, and every pitch is slightly different. She's someone who customizes it for the audience as well. They're not just trying to sell the same thing.
Yeah. But I love the fact that they're still there. The one other thing that we kind of touched on a little bit earlier is the regulatory environment. And I'm wondering if you can give me a little bit of an overview about like what it looks like from an InsurTech standpoint, and how the InsurTechs work together potentially with the regulators to foster the innovation that's necessary to just make institutional change.
Yeah, I mean, we have good dialogue with, there's two sort of main regulators, ASIC, it's all about the consumer, and then APRA is all about the sort of prudential regulations. And we've got to a point where we have a regular engagement with them, kind of 6 monthly around with our members and what's happening, and they're interested in seeing that. And that's been really, really productive. I mean, because we have the two types of InsurTechs, the distribution InsurTechs that have a license and selling a product, and the tech service vendors. And the distribution ones are very much, we don't have any that are trying to do a full stack insurance license. They're very much working within that insurance regime. So they're working within the guide rails and the requirements. So there is, I guess, a frustration around that. It does slow down what they can do because they are working with the incumbent insurers generally. So that is, an area for improvement, I think. But it's, yeah, and then I think for the tech services businesses, I think it's, most of them, it's all about sort of efficiency, and then how do they ensure that they're meeting all those, cyber and data and all those things, and that's almost sort of a paid, they have to do that to be in the sector, and they're all kind of across that. So for them, it's less of an issue, and it's more just staying up to date.
Have you seen this change that we've seen in other places across the globe, where I would say like 5 or 6 years ago, you heard all this talk about disruption, right? InsurTechs are just going to disrupt regardless of balance sheet size, which always sounded interesting to me. And now more of just enabling and doing what I call like value chain innovation. Does that make sense? Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, very much. I mean, even the ones that are, I guess you could say as disruptive as those that are trying to take the customers from the insurers, it's just really one insurer taking it away from another. Yeah, I mean, I don't, there's very few that are really doing something that's a different product market fit. A completely new insurance, that's pretty rare. And, I don't see a lot kind of globally either. We have one who's trying to develop a equity release home thing, and it's quite like, yeah, actual innovation. But yeah, other than that, most of them are just, evolution.
Do you see generational changes as well? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's hard for me at my age to see like what 25-year-olds are doing. I try to keep in touch with it as much as I possibly can. But because insurance is perceived differently by millennials and by Gen Z, do you see people trying to innovate for insurance products just for that cohort? Because, in the next 10 or 15 years, they're going to be the largest population in the sector anyway, right?
Yeah, I think we should see more of that. I'm a bit surprised that there's not, that hasn't driven more, and maybe it's still to come. There's still very much the traditional, brokers are as popular as ever here. 50% of the market is brokered, not so much in personal lines, but in corporate lines. So yeah, there isn't, but it's very much an evolution. So yeah, I think that's still an opportunity to come.
So we talked again earlier about how Australia was a great test market, right, to build products and then go out to the rest of the world. Do you think that there are things that the rest of the world can learn just by watching the market in Australia and seeing how both the insurers, InsurTechs interact with each other, but also how the innovation is happening there, and then blow that out as well to the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope it's what we're trying to kind of help them do. I think around claims we could lead in some of that, not all markets. So we have quite a long chain process where people have to rebuild. We've got repair and those kind of processes that don't exist in other markets. And so there's some quite, interesting, sophisticated technologies around that claims process. So I think that's somewhere that we should be leading and should be, more of a potential test bed. The geospatial, just because of the location and the risks and some of that sort of activity, although obviously there's other regions that have the different kind of things there.
And how do you look at building relationships with some of the other InsurTech associations in the region, like whether that goes all the way west to India or even, like we said, just like in Singapore and in Dubai? There are other places that are working on stuff too. What is to be gained by working together with them as well, right? So your cohort in Singapore, your cohort in Dubai, your cohort in Mumbai or in India?
Yeah, I mean, we talk, fairly regularly. I mean, it's a little ad hoc, but we talk fairly regularly with businesses that are looking to come into the market. And they might be saying, well, I've got this great business in India and it's been really successful, and, would it apply? And then we'll be like, yeah, well, yes, no, go and do this. I mean, we were part of this global InsurTech alliance, which was set up sort of more than 5 years ago with all the different InsurTech associations across the globe. And we just have a sort of WhatsApp group as a way to kind of keep in touch. And so it is very much through, and I think the others just, going to those global events and, meeting, it's still very much an in-person kind of activity. When you really get to meet them in the ground, then you can see common synergies. And when you've got, members that are looking to go into their region or come in, then you have a common ground.
Do you go to these events like the ITC events or the InsurTech Insight
so
events?
We've been going to ITC Asia in Singapore a few years, to Vegas and to the London one. But I mean, there are so many events. I know India does a great event. I mean, it's just how do you, I could spend my whole year doing events.
Yeah, it is. I think sometimes, though, it's been very worthwhile for me just to meet the people in person to whom we've been speaking. Again, I don't go to all of them either because I think some of them can end up being a little bit redundant. No insult intended to anybody that's putting them on. But yeah, I agree. Sometimes I think it's really effective to go, yeah?
Yeah. Well, we've got our own event in February if you want an excuse to come to Sydney.
I would love to have an excuse to come. So talk to me about it. What is the event that's coming up in February? What is what is it meant to be? Who's going to come? Who's it for?
So it's about sort of 350 people, so it's a reasonable, not huge, but a good size event. This is the fourth time we've run it. We'll sell out. We've sold out sort of every year, and it's very much around our community. So about 50% of our InsurTechs, they get to exhibit, they get to pitch. We sort of showcase what they're doing, but then also the insurers and their partners as well. So we want to be very much that bridge. So we'll have some emerging tech. We've got a speaker from the US, from Japan coming out. We'll have a panel of CIOs to hear, what are they actually doing? How are they working with the InsurTechs? A bit of an investor lens. So, and it's, all in a very much three-quarter fast and furious kind of format. So it works really well.
Can we make the case that a 350-person event is almost optimal?
Yeah,
Better than an event with 10,000 people. Sorry, go ahead, because I think that's 100% true.
Yeah, because at 350 you can pretty much see everyone that you need. You won't meet everybody there, but you can, and you've got the sort of main, and also you get a level of seniority there. I think sometimes with these bigger events they just become a bit of a junkie, don't they?
They do, don't they? I'm glad you said it and I didn't have to say it. But they do, and I talk about this all the time. If you're going to an event where there are 10,000 people, yeah, I don't know. I think you could eliminate 9,000 of them and still have a great event.
I mean, when we do, and we still, get a lot of value from them, but when we get the feedback, it's the other activity around the event. So it's the networking thing that we will host in that same week. It's, the introductions and, that we do around that's the value. And I think those organisers know that as well. I mean, I think they know that that's why they have the sort of sub-events and spin-off events. And yeah.
So I've never been to Australia. I don't know if I said this to you when we spoke during the prep call, but I've never been to Australia for more than 36 hours. I went there for a wedding.
Too short.
I'm not kidding. And then I went there to pick up my family because they were visiting the friends that were having the wedding. So, yeah. So I need a great excuse to come down there, and this could be one of them.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, and there's probably some great filming to do there too. If I ask you at the end of this, where do you see the Australian InsurTech ecosystem going over the next sort of 6 to 9 years? So if you look out into the future, what are we looking at as the future scope for this?
So one of the things I'd like to see is, how does it evolve into all those other adjacent sectors? So you've got, climate tech and property tech that are all relevant for insurance businesses, the whole health tech, med tech, all these kind of propositions. So I think seeing itself more broader will add value to the businesses and to the insurers that are working with those businesses. So, I'd like to see it to be sort of a bit of a conglomeration of different kind of subsectors. I think it'll continue to be global. And I just, see that, with the AI tools and, language and all those sort of things. So I think it'll just be more and more global. And then I think that means that to be successful, you may have to be more niche. Because I think, sometimes you'll see these pictures and, it's like another one of these things and you're like, there's, so many of them. It's going to be really high, no. And I think you can have quite a good business, but to kind of last, I think you need to be very clear on what that niche is and where you're adding value and how do you differentiate.
Can I ask you one more thing before I let you go? I know I said that was the last thing, but you just reminded me of something. Sorry.
Yeah, good conversation.
And there's more for me to learn. I'm always curious about how at the governmental level, really at a high level where the government is saying there needs to be, even if it's not support, but no impediments to innovation, if that makes sense. And I'm wondering if the government is cognizant of the fact that there needs to be kind of a vibrant venture capital system and a vibrant connection between what's happening in universities and how the innovation comes out of those universities and turns into real products, right? And also supporting InsurTech, FinTech, like you said, health tech, climate tech, and all this stuff. Is there a sense inside the country that there's not an impediment, but there's actually support from the government at scale?
Look, I think there could be more there. It's a little patchy. There's some things that they're doing, but it's very self-led. I mean, we're entirely funded from our members and partners. We don't have any kind of government funding at all. And the InsurTechs, to kind of get through those first 2 years, I think there could be more that could be done at a sort of governmental level. In terms of, we have some great schemes around R&D and things, but there could be some more to just really accelerate that time to market. And I think the other side of it needs to be from the insurers. How can they be allowed to adopt this technology. Often it's, there's not an incentive for them to do something different, but they can just kind of keep doing the same thing, and they know that their systems don't work, and they have to kind of keep apologising for being slow in their claims, and they know they could be better, but they don't have that sort of burning platform to really make that leap.
So let's hope we can push them in that way. Look, I really want to thank you, and I want to offer something to you before I let you go. You said 100 and something member companies that are there.
Yeah.
We'd love to feature more of them. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to say publicly, like, if you have any great ones, you don't have to tell me now. But even if you don't tell me when we get off the call, as you go through your day-to-day and you think, these people should be featured on the Asia InsurTech podcast, I'll leave it up to you to just go like, yeah, let's just make the introduction. And I'm happy to have them all on. Simone Dossetor, the CEO of InsurTech Australia. I really appreciate your time. I've learned a lot, and I think I get a much better sense now of what's going on there. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, it's been a great conversation, and yeah, hopefully I'll see you in February.
I'd love to.